Hello, welcome to Learn, School and Create. 4 days so far in this journey, and I've already perceived the results from so many of you. I'm super proud and super glad to see that we've been able to achieve quite a lot in these few days. So let's continue our journey of exploring and building HTML structures using HTML tags. In today's lesson, we are going to explore the forms. So what is it? What are forms? Forms are structures used on web applications to collect information from the users to the application system or to the core of the application itself. They are interfaces of communication between the application and then the user, and they also interface various users on the system on the same application. So they also interface various users on an application. So and a great example to this scenario is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. So whenever you are on Facebook, your inputs are actually collected through forms and then presented to other users who are on your network or in your network. And the same thing goes on YouTube. You produce a video, then you send the video to YouTube via a form, then YouTube takes the video and then presents it to all the followers or any other person who comes across it. And the same thing goes with Twitter. Twitter, it is obvious as soon as you open it, you just have a text box in which they require you or they ask you to enter what is in your mind. So you tweet with that. So forms are integral parts to websites. Also on any website, just like ours right now, whenever we want to go in touch with our users, we ask them to make a registration so that we get acquainted to each other. So it is very important. It's almost impossible to come across a website without any form or any some sort of form on it. It might just be a little label. It might just be a little field to just collect newsletters, registrations. So like this, or just to search like in this area here. So forms can be in any form and they can also appear everywhere. But basically, the core concept is to be able to collect information from the users to the system. So our goal in this lesson is to learn how to use the forms, how to insert forms on our web pages, and what are the things we should learn about forms when it comes to building good forms. So I've already prepared an analogy here for you, and I have at my right side a device called Mixer. So what this device does is it will actually allow you to make various inputs, so you can tune a particular soundtrack and fine tune it with the various variation of tonality and so many, I don't know, music stuff. So, and in the end it comes out with a mixed voice, a mixed sound. So basically you can have a sound, and you might meet this kind of scenarios where a DJ comes to a party and then it has this beat going on, and then on the beat now you can add some other voice. You can add a voice or add other sounds and mix them together and have an output sound. So basically that's how forms are all about. So the forms, everything about form is this element we see. There are so many elements that can be used to input various types of information. It is very important, various types of information. But the form tag itself is just like the way we use the UL or OL and DL. So we just open it, we close it, and in between it we can now enter every single thing we want to have. And the things that are in the form are just these elements we are seeing here, and they are generally called the controls of the form controls. So in here we'll have the form controls. So they are just like the controls of that mixer's control, that mixer's interface controls. So just like this button controls the pitch of the sound, this one might control the email. just like this one controls the amplitude of the sound, this one can control the phone number. So every single control element is used to collect specific information, right? So, and that is determined by what we call the type of information we are collecting through the form. So our goal in this lesson is to explore how to insert a form on a web page, and also how to handle the types. How do we insert various types of fields? That's another name for the controls. So each one of these controls, how do we get them on? So without any hesitation, let's move into our project folder. So we go back to the Lance course project folder. So you go to your documents, then you go to the project Lance course, the folder Lance course. So here it is mine, and then I'll create day 4. So new folder, right click, you choose new, then you choose folder, and then you name it day 4. So we'll go inside day 4 to start creating our files. So in here we will do right click again, or we'll go inside this menu and then choose new, and then we choose new text document, and the new text document will rename the file into forms.html. So yes, do you want to change that? Yes, I want to change the extension, and then I'll change the view here to make the file look huge. So right here I can now open it with my text editor to edit the source code. You could use edit with Notepad or edit with any text editor you might have. So talking about text editors, I think it is time I add a bracket here. I got calls and people were actually worried about me using Sublime Text in the previous lesson. So actually the reason is to just also have a clean code that you can understand. Whenever the source code is huge, if I'm to continue using Notepad, it might become very cumbersome for you to see and follow up. So that's why I decided to go with Sublime Text. In addition to that, it will also help me gain time in reducing typing some of the code that might waste time if I am to type them all together. So that's why I chose to go with Sublime Text. And they also asked me if they could use this same Sublime Text. Yes, you can use it, but I said earlier on, the reason why I asked you to use Notepad is to actually help you to type a lot, to make you type a lot, because text editors such as Sublime Text, VS Code, and so they actually have shortcuts to make to help you avoid typing some codes. So if you don't already know these codes, it might look like magic and you might not learn them, you might not memorize them. So if you know that you are not that good yet with the tags and you still want to be able to learn some of them, memorize some of them, it's best you continue with the Notepad. And all I will do with my Sublime Text, just type the exact same thing. You don't have to worry. And one question that came out too in that concern was the lines of code. So if I open it here, so the question, so let me close these existing files. So we are now dealing with the forms. So the question was that I typed HTML, and then on my keyboard I typed tab key, and then it will generate this boilerplate or the skeleton. So remember, we already learned in day 2 how to type this skeleton. The only new thing is these 2 lines, and I underlined that matter in day 3's video, where I said there are just extra and additional information, what we call the metadata. So we can also ignore that. So the title for our document, we can set it as forms, and now we all have a bare code. So the other concern was the numbers we see at the left side here. If you are to type this code using Notepad, you don't have to type these numbers 1, 2, 3. No, it's just my text editor that is numbering every single line of my code, so that I know at least my code here is just 9 lines of code and so on. So you don't type the numbers. Now let's go back to the business of the forms. So how do we get the forms? Like I said earlier, we use the forms tag. So let's go ahead. We will set the form tag. So I'll do form. So you can see these are some of the things I want to have in this text editor, this speed in getting my tags typed. So let me zoom and then allow you to see better. So we use the form tag to get the form in. By doing Ctrl S and saving the changes, then I'll switch back to my Files Explorer. Then I double click on the file name to open it with my browser in order to preview the result. So here I can see that I still have a blank page. So let me add some text here to be sure that indeed we are on the same page. I'll use a heading one and say HTML forms. And if I go back to the browser to reload the file I opened earlier, I can see the text shows up. So indeed, I'm editing the right source code. So now let's go ahead and learn what we can do with this form tag. So the form tag actually has 6 primary sub tags. Remember, with the UL, UL and OL, we had only LI as sub tag. With the DL, we had DT and then we had DD as sub tags. So for the form, we have quite a certain number of tags, but out of these, 6 are very important. The first one is the input sub tag. The second one is the select control. So remember, if I say input tag or input element, or I say form control, or I say field, I'm actually talking about the same thing. So we have select, then we have label, then we have field set, then we have button, and we have text area. So if we count this element, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They are not all mandatory every time you are having a form. It would depend on the design of the form. Now, the reason why we have these types, so if I copy them and bring to the drawing board here. So if I bring these elements here, we can be able to draw around them in this time. So the input element is actually used for most common element you might see in a form like our example form here. But the select element is also special when we have multiple choices to make. The label is just to label. The field set is used to group form controls. The button is now the actual button that needs to be clicked in order to submit the form or clear the form content or reset the form content, and so then the text area is just another input element, but specifically for large text. So if we go back and see how to get them used, so how do we actually use them? Let's start from the input element. And before we even move, you can see that the only ones that get you to insert an input field is this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. And these two are simply for layouting, just for design, right? These two are just for organization. The only ones that will allow you to have a field where user has to make a particular input are only these 4 elements. So how do we get them inserted? We'll start from the input. To insert an element of type input, or to insert the input control, we just open the less than sign, we type input, and we are done. So it is a tag that stands on its own. So if you go back to the page to reload, you should see that there's a box that shows up here, which is ready to take an input from the user. That's it. Simple, right? So the next one, which is the select, this one is also peculiar because it has its own sub tags. So I would like to jump it quickly for now and use it at the end so that we get used to the actual star before we come back to complicating the basic things. So let's move to the next one, which is the text area. So that one is an even tag. So we just type text area. It is used to collect large text. So for example, when you have a contact form where the person will type the actual message of the contact or the reason of the contact, that can be inside a text area tag. And that tag, like I said, is even. It always opens and closes. So that's it. This one is self-closing, so we don't need to close anything. This one requires the closing tag. And then the next one, which is the button, to type button, and this one too requires to be closed because the button is the actual thing the user will click on. It must be limited to a certain size. So we can now add the text that the user will see and type on it. So button, and it will generate a tiny button. So it will generate a button like this. It will not be rounded, and the text I wrote there will appear in between inside here. So if we preview again, we reload, you can see the first input, the second text area, and then the button with the label entered here. So it means anything you add, it will be considered. Submit up, for example, it shows up the same thing. So this might not look like seriously interesting like you might see on most websites, and just like the one I drew here, I wish we could get something like that. It's not always as simple as you might think. The forms by default don't come with any star, so the styling has to be done differently, and that's the subject of the CSS class. Once we get to the week 2, where we are going to study CSS, and we are going to learn how to style forms in this fashion. So for now, stick around, subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow us on all other social media pages, and then please do not hesitate to share. Leave a comment or your questions you usually ask me on WhatsApp. You can also leave them below the videos, and allow others to also know that yes, there's this challenge and this challenge. They might not even be conscious of it for now. So by asking your question, it allows others to know about the problem and learn from it as well. And it also reduces the load on me when you have to ask the question and another person will come and ask the same question. So if you had asked the question on YouTube, I would have answered the question once and it would have benefited many people at the same time. Or I could also refer people to this comment and be like, yes, I've answered this question here, check the answer out. So please do like, subscribe, and leave your questions below. So let's continue. We've inserted the input elements, and like I said, these are the elements, the tags that actually allow us to get an input element or a control field. The others, like I said, they are used for organization. Now let's try the label. Let me come here and just write label. It is also an even tag, so it opens and closes. And then I say this is a label, and we'll see what that gives. If I type, go back to the preview, refresh, you can see it's just plain text. So the label is simply any text that accompanies a control field. So if you take this control field right now, there's this text that accompanies it as an indication and tells us what to do with this field, or what is wanted from us, what is required from us to be entered in this field. So that's what we call the label. So you might get forms where the label is not added. It's still a great thing. So to add a label to an input element like this guy here, you just have to put it right before it, after it, or right next to it like this. It doesn't matter. Anywhere you put, that's where the label will appear. So you can see, because I place it here, the label appears here. And because if I decide to place it right after, so the label goes after, you see the position will also change. The label moves to the other side. So basically, it's up to you. Now there's a way of linking a label to an input. So we tie them together so that this label, wherever it's positioned, it works with only this input. So we'll come back on this aspect shortly. But for now, let's look at what we have here and see how best we can try to organize our form in that fashion. So if we take that this label is for this first input, so we could rather say first name inside. So we say first name. Since we know that this label, based on the design we have here, appears before the field, so it is ideal that we actually put that label here before the input, and I will space it. Then for the next level, which is the text area, and if we look at the text area we have in this form, it says biography. So the label is biography. So we add the label tag, and then we say biography. Good. And then it accompanies the text area. And then we have the button. This one does not need any label because by default it has a labeling text on it, so there's no need. Now let's try to preview our code, and we should see now every label has a text field or a field in front of it to allow us to enter something. Now, another thing you could notice is that these tags are following each other. So this is an aspect we'll discover in tomorrow's lesson, which is concerning inline and block tags. So for now, we should know that we want this label and its input to stand on one line, and then the biography and this text area to go to the next line, and the button to the next line. And we should use, as you might know, our special tag BR to break the line and force the next thing after the input to go to the next line. And we'll do the same thing here, force anything to go to the next line, and then we can see that happen here. It doesn't look like what you have in the template, the design I have, but this is the great job already. It's this same basic thing that can be transformed into a beautiful stuff like this. So do not worry for now, you are still on track. So now let's try to produce this whole form and understand the concept of types. Like we said earlier concerning attributes, they usually come to help us improve the functions of HTML tags. So far, what we have done is to insert some input controls without adding any attribute. So we could add some attributes to improve and change their nature or their type. We'll start from the input element. Even before that, you can imagine if I said that it is only these 4 elements that are used in order to create form controls like this. How is that possible that we could already eliminate the button, because we already see the button gives us just the button. And we also notice that the text area gives us only the text area. So if I add my button here, so this is a button. Don't laugh at my button. So this is the button. So it means this guy is eliminated, this guy is eliminated. So the only guys that are left are these two. So how are we able to get a field or a control with this format, where we can increase the age by talking top here, tap, 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 we increase the age, or down, tap, tap, we reduce the age. And here, where we can choose the gender by just clicking, and it will open up and give us the gender. So we have only 2 elements left to be able to achieve all this. We have these guys here that are round, and we have this guy here which is also a kind of square and takes a tick. And we have this guy here which who takes this password and keeps it hidden. So how are we able to achieve such controls? How are we able to produce such control fields using just these two? And the reality, the truth is, we could say it's only using this input we can achieve that much. This one allows us to get a list. This is what we call a list. It allows you, when you click something open up like this, and then you see a list of things to pick from. So it is usually good for the gender, uh, the country you are from. So they are pre-existing lists that we don't usually need to change. So that's an example. So let me keep it here as an illustration like this. So let's go ahead and discover the types of the input that allow us to fine-tune the input's nature. So the type is a very complex attribute on the input. We already said for the gender, we are just using select. So we are now left with only the input element. Others, we've seen what they are used for. We haven't tried this field set here, but we'll come on it shortly. But so far, we've seen that button gives button, text area just gives text area, label just gives plain text. Select will now give us a list. So we are left with input. So the only tag we need to fine tune in order to come up with the remaining types of inputs is the input tag. And to do that, we fine tune or we touch the type. We change the type. By changing the type, we are able to change what input field we get in the end. So the types are quite a lot. So let me use the text element to type the types. So the first type we have is the text type. So let me increase the text. So the first type we have is the text type. That's what allows us to have a plain input which can collect first, last name, and anything that is plain text. And the next type we can see is the number type. This number type is used to collect numbers, just like in the age case here, where we can increase the age by talking up there, the arrow above and the arrow below to decrease. So that's the number type. The other type we can see is tel. It allows us to collect telephone numbers. Then another type, which is very common, is the password. So whenever you set the input type to password, then you end up getting something with these dots. So basically, the browser starts to protect that field and hides its content while you are typing it, but internally, it is still taking the characters you are typing. So the next type we have is the hidden type. Interestingly, there's a type to allow you to hide the field, the input control. And you might ask, why would I create a form field and get it hidden? Yes, because we want some of these fields we want to collect some information from the form, but we don't want it to be entered by the user himself. So the user won't see it, but that field exists in the form. So in the submission, whatever value that field has will also go along to the server. So the next field we have is the checkbox. So now you can see from this list that all these controls can be achieved. This is the checkbox I just mentioned. So the next field is the radio. The radio are the ones with the round and with the check here. So they look like checkbox, but they are round. So these are radios. So we achieve that using the type radio. The next type we might think about is the submit type. When this type is set on an input, that input becomes like the button, right? So it is a button. Then we have the reset type, which is also used to change the input into a button, but a button that clears the form's content. Then we have another type called file. Remember, there are so many occasions on websites wherever you sign up, there will be like upload your picture, your profile picture. Every time you upload your picture on WhatsApp, you change your status pictures and so on. Every time you do that, you are working with a file form control or file input, the file input. Then we have the image type, which also allows the input element to be as an image. So to pick an image. And then we have the button type, which is also like the submit and transforms any input into a button. So these are some of the types we see that the input element uses to control the field's nature and whatever the field can collect. So let's go to the exploration of these various types and see what we can do. So we'll do that by trying to build this form we have here. So we already have the first name, which is the type should be text, as you could guess, because it's just a plain text. And we move on, we pick all these elements. So I will type it for you to see, label, and then that will be last name, and then after the label, I will insert the input we need, input, and then we add the attribute type, and we assign to it text2 because we are just taking the last name. Then the next field is the email. So this time around we add a label again, and we say email address. We close the label, and now we add the input. But since it is an email, we expect the user to enter here, so we set the attribute type to email, and we close the input. Then we move to the next field, which is the password control. So we add the label, then we close the label. The label content should be, what did we say, password? It seems like, okay, password. So we go ahead with password, and this one we insert the input for it, and the type, we set the type to password. So ignore the name for now because it can take many other attributes, but we are interested in the type attribute for now. So the next field is the telephone number. So we go ahead, we add the label, and then we say telephone. Then we close the label, and when we open the input field and we add the type attribute equals to, then we say tel. Then we close the input. Then we move on to the next label, and then we do label, we close it, and which input are we taking? Age. So we say age, and this age is a number, and it is not a decimal number because we hardly will enter ages with 5.2, 3 point so we don't do that with ages in general. So we do input type equals to. So we move on to the next element, which is the gender, and this is where we make use of the select. So gender. So this time around we use the tag called select. Remember, I told you this tag is complex because it also has its subtags. So by calling the select tag, it's not enough because we have a list to pick from. So for this list, just assume that this select here plays the role of UL, just like the way we saw the UL do, and then inside we put LI. But here, instead of LI, we use the keyword option, and we close the option. So every single element in the list that displays is an option. Every single element is an option, not the LIs. So this is an analogy that could help you in remembering. So we said female as the first gender, and all we have to do is copy and paste, and then we say male. So this will give the user the two options to choose from. So if we wanted the user to actually choose one gender by force, was by doing so, it will pick the first one as the default value. So if we don't say no, don't pick any value by default, let the user choose, it will pick this by default. So if I preview to let you see what I mean, you can see that the female is selected by default. So we can add another option up here, and this will be to ask the user to choose. So by default, the choose will be the default value, and now the user can have the option, the choice between the two genders. So let me make the female capital letters as well. So, and that inserts this. So we forgot to add the BRs. So we do BR, and then another BR, another BR, and another BR here, all this. Good. So by doing that, we should have something better now. So after age 2, so this gender, good. So we have that. So the next field to insert is this 2. And I said these two are the major, which is either computer science or applied art. It can't be the two. So this also, these two inputs are quite interesting to use. So let's look at it. So we say label, and the label is major. Now the options to pick from, and this is how we do that. We input an element of type, and the type here is called radio, like I said earlier. And then we now put in front of it computer science. So that's the first radio button. So I'll have to do the same thing for the second one. Since I want the other one to go to the next line, so I'll add a BR here, and then this will be applied art. Sorry. So applied art. And if I preview, you should see the two here. Right? So we can click on one, click on this, so that works. So we have major, which says applied science, and this one, so we should add some BR here as well, so that it pushes the biographies field below. So if I refresh, you can see the two here, but there's a problem. Normally we said whether you pick this or this, you cannot pick the two, and right now it feels like I can pick the two. So this is the particularity of these radio buttons. We need to set something in addition. We need to add a name attribute. So when we set them with the same name, so we give them one common name, then they will be tied to each other and then start being antagonistic. So either this or this, either this or this. So if you have them 10, you have to make sure they all have the same name. So once they have the same name, they become antagonistic. That's a strange behavior. So once we have the same name, we become enemies. So kind of, that's how the radio buttons work, right? So the next component we want is the biography. We already have that inserted here, so we can keep it. And then the next one after the biography is the agreement to the terms and conditions. So this one too just works like the radio buttons, but this time around, instead of calling it setting the type as radio, we set the type as checkbox. So because this will now give us the chance of choosing many things if we are to check like our favorite meals. Our favorite meals, we choose rice, beans, and salad, and so on. So this is our checkbox. We have multiple choices. But the radio buttons, we only choose one out of whatever the number is. So agreed with the terms. So here we can see that by default it shows that this agreed with terms is ticked. It is been checked by default. So to make that, we add an attribute checked. So it is a Boolean attribute. Remember, it actually has a value of true. So it is truly checked. So if now we preview our form, we should have everything in place. If I remove this checked here, you should see that the checking is gone. I have to check it. So in some cases, you might want the user to check it by themselves before they submit. If you check it by default, it might be like you are cheating them. So basically, that's how we could have this form inserted. It's quite interesting that it doesn't look like what we have in the design. So that's where CSS comes into our rescue. So once we start learning CSS, we know how to go about this. So there are so many other types that you can explore on your own and see how they behave. But the core concept is there. So the input element is the one that helps us to generate various forms of input fields, various types of input fields. By the way, let's give it a try and see. So we have Ahmed, Zubuli, then the email, and so let me see. I think we set the type as email, right? Yes, the type is email. So let me do something. Let me add required to see. So we'll come back on this add stuff. So required, let's say I do this. I submit. So you can see it says please include an @ in the email address. So let me remove the required and see. And then I do something like this. So here you can see it's still showing me that I have to indicate an @ because we set the type as an email. If you enter any simple thing, it will tell you that format does not match an email format. So it's a good thing to have in to set the types, the exact type of the data you are going to collect. It's part of the validation principles. So we go ahead, Ahmed, Zubuli, me, Zubuli.me, password. So you can see as soon as I start typing the password, it is hidden. So the phone number, and if I submit, okay, it goes. Okay, let me come back. I was expecting it to deny, to reject it. So I will fill it again. Ahmed Zubuli, me at zubuli.me, password, telephone 02410446. Then the age, and you can see for the age element, you can see it gives me the control buttons to increase or decrease the age. So the age we write 16. And then the gender, you can see we have the option of choosing in the list, and the major we can now toggle. So the same thing for the major, we can pick one by default by using the checked attribute. So if I refresh, all the things we filled will go. And then the biography, I can now write anything I want, and there's no limit. And now I can agree. So once I'm done, I can submit that form, and then the form will be submitted. So I would like to touch some few things before we end this lesson. And the first thing is going to be the labels. The labels, I mentioned earlier on, that there's a way we can tie them to the input elements. So that to do that, we use one attribute of the labels that called the for. So which is this label is for. So once we say that, what is it for? So let's assume this is going to be the first name. So we have to say it is for the first name. Let me say I name it this way. Anything you want, you can choose the name the way you want. You can even make it FN, which is the first letters of first name. So but by doing that, you must come to the first name input field here and identify it as FN. So you set the ID attribute on it. And remember, I said that the ID attribute is helps us to identify an input element or any HTML element as a unique element which has that ID. It's just like your ID card, or the number on your ID card. The number must be unique. So the same thing goes with the input or the HTML tags. Whenever you set an ID attribute to that tag, whatever value the ID takes, no other tag should have the same value as their ID. So by doing that, since we know that trick, we can now tie the label to the ID of any input. And we know no other input should have that same ID. So these two become now bound together. So it doesn't matter where we place it now. It can be somewhere here. If I refresh and now click on the label, the first name label, you see it will jump the cursor to the exact field that is tied to it. It doesn't matter the position. It doesn't have to be in front or before it. And that is very interesting. So let's return it, and we do click on the label, and you see it brings the cursor in the field to show me that this label goes with this input. So we can do the same thing for the last name. So we do label for, and we also name that one LN for last name, and then we add the ID, which is LN. And if we come and refresh, we click on last name, you see it takes the cursor inside. So that's one thing you can do for all your fields. It is advised to have it. So the next thing I wanted to tackle, which is an aesthetic problem, we are using BRs here, and it doesn't seem to help us much with the spacing. It's like we might have to use many of these BRs in order to get a nice spacing. So one thing we could do is to take this whole thing, so every single block, and then we put it in a tag called div, which stands for division. So this tag is kind of anonymous tag. It doesn't do much apart from creating a block. So it creates a kind of tile, just like tiling your house. So it creates a tile, and then it puts everything inside it. So you see, nothing special changed, but this is better. It looks better than having the BR, because if we were to style this and tell it, okay, have some background, so that will affect this input and its label, and that's going to be easier to control. So we do the same thing here. We put div, and we place the content inside, and you can see, so it still gives us the same result without us having to use this BR, which can be difficult to maintain. So div, we place the content inside, and so on. So I'll do the same thing for these guys. We remove this, we do div, we paste, we indent, we take this, we do div, we paste, we indent, right? So this goes on. So the label for this two, so div, to the major as well. So for the biography, so good, we now get the same result without any problem, but this time around our code is a bit meaningful. So we have a division for this, a division for this, a division for this, and so on. That is a bit interesting. So the next thing I would like us to look at is the form tag itself. This form tag can also have some attributes we can add to it, starting from the name. The name is used to identify that form uniquely, so we can target the form with its name. And then we can also use the element class. We can also add it to a group of tags that have the same class. We'll go back to these elements later on. Then we can also set an ID to it. But some of the most important attributes the form require are the method in which the content must be sent. So if this form data has to be sent to the server, what HTTP method are we going to use? So remember, we are actually talking about HTTP communication. We mentioned earlier on, HTTP is the protocol defined by the web, which tells us how data is sent back and forth between the client and the server. So from the client, which is our browser now, where the form lies here, where the form lies, we are about to send an information to the server. So for us to have the page loading, the server actually replied to us when we type the address in the address bar. The server heard our request through this address and replied by giving us this result. Now we are about to send something back to the server. So what method are we using? So in general, you can see we are mentioned somewhere the HTTP verbs. I think in one of the articles under some of these lessons. So we have the verbs like post, get, delete, options, and so. So in general, you'll be using either post here, or you'll be using get. By default, the form will work on get. So it means even if you don't specify this attribute, it can still work. So the other attribute that is very important for the form tag itself is the encoding type. It's called enc type. So this encoding type, by default, it is application / x dash and so many other things. So x dash ww dash form and dash URL encode. So basically what this says is, okay, by default, send the data through the URL. So let me complete it. Encode URL encoded. It's encoded. So by doing that, let me even remove the method and try to submit the form. You see. So we do submit, and you can see. So it's trying to send the data through the URL of the website. Since we didn't fill the rest, it does not give us anything. So if we do this, add something, we enter password, the phone number. So the age, you see the age is not taking letters. So we type, we agree, and then we submit. We got some error, right? So I will fill it again. Fill it, fill it. So agree. So add sign. Then we submit. So you can see it sends us this. I think the reason is simple. Yes. Here you can see what it's supposed to append every single field's value in the URL. So that's what this option actually tells the form to do. And by adding the get option, we are also emphasizing on the same principle. The data should be sent through the URL. So if I do this, type the password, phone number, the age, choose this, and then submit. So you see the same thing happens. So these two options are by default set up. So that's how the form will send the data by default. Now coming back to the problem, the reason why we are seeing only major, which is on, is because the major, which is the radio buttons, we've set the name to them. So all the inputs require to have a name. So without the name, the value of the input cannot be collected. So in our case, we can still use the FN as the name of this input. And this one we set name as last name, LN. And this one we set the name as email. And this guy we set the name as password. Sorry, name, password. Then this one we set the name as telephone or tel. This guy takes the name of number, not number, age rather. And this one we set the name as well on the actual select element, not on the options. So we select the name as gender because it will actually pick what the user picked from here as the value of this gender. So the next is the radio. We already have set that, and the input elements too, we set the name as bio. So the checkbox, we also set the name as terms. So once that's done, we can go back, fill the form again. So we go back there. We have it zoomed. So we fill the form with some dummy data. So we enter anything, let's say me at tester.com. Then the password, we do password. Telephone, we type some number. The age, we do 65. And then we already have choose computer science. This is my bio. And we agree with the thing. So when I submit, this time when you look at the URL, you can see it appends the first name, which is FN, that's the name and the value entered. It will append the LN, which is the last name and the value are entered. the email, which is the email's field name, and the value are entered, and so on to the biography. So by doing that, it will send this whole URL to the server with the content inside. So that's what this encode type and this method do. So what if I change this method into post? Refresh, type something, email something, and then password something, phone, age, then the biography, then we enter. So you see, this time around, because we set that we shouldn't get it, we shouldn't send it through the URL, it goes anonymously. So it is one of the good methods used in sending private data like passwords and so on. But it doesn't matter. There's no actual rule that forces you to use post or get, except when we are talking about REST APIs and so on. But this is a large topic and that you will discover as you continue to build more applications. So it is still great. So you can change the verb here, the method, send the form data through the URL, and it actually silently sends it. And to make the difference is whenever you send a form like this and you refresh it again, you realize it tells you, oh, are you trying to resubmit the form? You should know that that form works with the post method. So that's one particularity with this method. So the other thing we would like to look at, which is the encode type, is this encode type is good for supporting ASCII character code and short, small content that does not take large data. So when we want to deal with input that support large data, just like pictures, then we might need to do something. So for example, if we add a div and we add a label, and that label is for let's say picture, and we want picture, the user to enter the picture. So for this kind of input, remember we have an input type, like I said in here, which is file. So this is used to collect files. So we are going to set this input type into file, and we are going to name it picture. So for this type of inputs, whenever you have them on your form, you cannot use this encode type. It won't work. It will send the content of the form or the fields, it will send the values, but except the input type file. So to change it into something that can support a file, we add multi-part form data. So by using this encode type, the image will be supported and all other fields too will be supported. So it still doesn't matter whether you go with get or post, it's still the same. So, and this get and post can be written either in small letters or capital letters, still good. So this brings us to the end of this lesson on forms. If you take your time, try to practice this, you should be fine and you should be able to build any form on your web pages. So wait up for your assignment, try to go through your quizzes as well. Listen very well, practice well before you take the quiz so that you are sure of your knowledge. Thank you for sticking around. If you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, kindly consider doing that and follow us on our various social media platforms as well. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.